Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Matt Komorowski, and I have the pleasure of running PayPal's business within Northern and Central Europe. And I'm actually here today to speak to you about e-commerce, but actually more specifically about crossing borders. So going global is not just about going global. It's about, like I mentioned, crossing borders. And we're going to be crossing three different types of borders today. We're going to be crossing demographic borders. We're going to be crossing geographic borders. We're going to be crossing digital borders. And I assume that most of you today here have heard of PayPal, but just for the benefit of those who may not, we are a payments company. We've been around for almost 20 years. We started off in doing online payments. We've always done online payments to connect buyers and sellers from over 200 countries across the world. We're trying to help them send money to each other. A couple stats just about us. So we have over 200 million active users. So we started off, like I mentioned, 99. In the year 2000, we had 1 million. Today, we have over 200 million. We processed about 350 billion in payments last year. So that's about $117,000 every second. We know a little bit about payments, especially with also about 6 billion transactions that we process. But we're processing payments for people who already have access to financial services. So when we look at where payments are today, it's already come quite a long way from where they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. 15% of payments is non-cash. That means 85% of payments is still happening with cash. Now, with everyone here in the room, I'm assuming that every single one of you have at least one smartphone. Most of you probably have two, because statistically, most people in this country do have two smartphones. I'm sure there's at least one person in the crowd, because there always is, that has three. How you manage that, I'm not quite sure, but there always is somebody. But having that smartphone in your wallet, I'm sure that many people on this stage today have already mentioned it, that means that you actually have access to a bank or all the services of a bank branch in your pocket or in your hand. And that opens up tons of possibilities in terms of how we can actually extend typical financial services that we all have the liberty of using across demographic borders. There's 2 billion people in the world today that don't have access to basic financial services. And you won't necessarily have a bank setting up a branch in all these locations, but having a bank branch in your wallet, or should I say in your pocket, in the form of a smartphone, means that you actually have access to all of those people. And just to give you another statistic, and not to give you an idea of how that's growing, in 2010, 1% of the volume that we processed came from smartphones, or tablets for that matter, so mobile devices. Last year, it was 30%. So it's growing continuously, from 1 to 30% in 7 years, and it's going to continue that trend. So that's one of the ways that payments and financial services are crossing demographic borders. But then there's also a lot happening in terms of crossing geographic borders. So the beauty of e-commerce is the fact that it doesn't have to be local. You open up a website, and you can start selling globally. And that's happening more and more, especially in a place like the European Union, where you don't necessarily have many trade barriers to prevent you from doing that, especially if you're selling digital goods or services. You don't have any barriers because you don't need to ship it. So if we look at this, what we're forecasting, by the year 2021, there's going to be over $400 billion in cross-border e-commerce happening. 40% of that's going to be happening from China. 60% is going to be happening from North America, from Europe. So huge opportunity in that. And the volume is growing incredibly quickly. So out of the 350 billion that we processed last year, 22% of that was cross-border. And it's continuing to grow, as you see, very quickly. What does that mean in Poland? So out of the surveys that we've done with entrepreneurs in Poland, 32% of them believe that they're going to be selling more cross-border this year than they did last year. So quite optimistic in terms of that. And we have some companies that we work with, fantastic companies, not the big brands that you always hear about in the news, but small, medium businesses who are started up in Poland quite recently. They're being very successful selling across Europe. A company called TAF1 from Poland, making custom designed athletic apparel, right? Managing to sell all across Europe. A company called Noble Lashes. They make artificial eyelashes, started by two brothers, boxers, not necessarily the kind of people you would imagine running a business that does artificial lashes, but they're one of the biggest companies that do this in Europe, and they're exporting over a quarter of their sales from outside of the country that they're in, which is Poland. Spock Socks, last example, started selling custom socks, high quality. Interesting thing is none of their socks actually match, which make it much easier when you're trying to figure out what you're going to wear in the morning. But they're selling to 30 countries, from Australia through to the US. So when we actually do studies with companies to try to understand what helps them or prevents them, or why do people actually buy cross-border? So the key barriers is, first of all, as a company, how do I actually ship my product cross-border? Second one is, well, okay, nobody knows me, right? How can I make sure that that person that wants to buy, they're going to trust me? And that's where, the big challenge comes in, is how do you actually build trust with somebody that you don't know, that you can't actually touch? Then you have the return process and the language barrier. Then when we look at why do people buy, because one thing is, we're selling cross-border, but then most of you in the room here, you also buy things. When you're buying cross-border, when we did some studies, these are the things that you consider. So first of all, you're much more likely to buy something from abroad if you get it shipped for free. Great. But then you don't know who this company is. So we as customers, we're also interested to make sure that the payment we're going to make is going to be safe, that we're actually going to pay for something and we're going to get the product that we ordered. So there's that trust component again. Then you have some other elements in terms of local currencies to understand how much you're actually paying. So what do we do to enable cross-border, so to actually help companies and people cross geographic barriers or geographic... we offer something called buyer and seller protection. So we've actually taken it upon ourselves to become the intermediary of trust. So it's not just about actually sending payments. It's actually gone beyond that. It's about being a source of trust for two parties that have no contact with each other. So we guarantee the payment both for the consumer and for the seller. So as a consumer, if you buy something, well, we'll guarantee that you actually, you're going to get that product. If you don't get it, we'll return your money. If you're selling, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say, all right, if you actually sell that product and you show that you actually shipped that product, if something happens, we'll actually cover it for you. And we've actually recently, just last week, extended that not just to physical products, but also to digital products. So if you sell services online, photos, tickets, travel, etc., that's also covered. So what do we do? As I mentioned, one thing is trust. Second thing is we realize one of the barriers is, okay, you buy something from abroad, but how do you actually return that product? You have to pay for it. So if you remove that barrier again, which we do with a program that we have refunded returns, we realize that people are much more likely to buy things from abroad if they know they don't have to actually pay for returning it. Then the other one, which I'm going to mention, is actually one touch. So we were talking about crossing a third barrier, right, or a third border. And that's the digital border. So we crossed it once by going from, store to online. We went from traditional desktops to laptops, from laptops to mobile, but now it's actually crossing another border and saying, well, why do I need to keep re-entering my information when I want to pay for something? Why can't I simply, assume that my phone has sufficient security and I can trust that device and I can trust the payment institution which is processing this for me to actually be able to simplify that? Why do I actually have to go through the hassle of paying? Why can't I pay with just one touch? So we've actually implemented that. We have 50 million people across the world that are actually now paying with one touch that's authorized on a device. You authorize a device once, it lasts up to 6 months. And there's PayPal Me for goods and services. So in other words, you set up a PayPal account and, well, like right now, I don't need to give you my email address. I actually give you my link. If you like this presentation, you feel like sending me some money because you thought it was cool, right. PayPal Me / money on my mind, money goes directly into my PayPal account. And not just for paying me. You have small and medium businesses that don't actually have a web shop. You have people who are providing services online, but they don't have a checkout. How do you actually pay them? How can they get paid in an easy way? Exactly with that. So what's coming next in terms of e-commerce? So something called contextual commerce. So we've talked about trust. We've talked about moving into different devices and crossing digital borders. So there's another digital border that we can cross. Why do you actually have to go to a web store to buy something? Or to an app to buy something? Why can't I buy that directly from my email? So you always buy black t-shirts. You get an email from your favorite store that sells you black t-shirts. Here's the newest t-shirt. It's on sale. Do you want to buy it? Well, traditionally, you click yes. You go to the store. You fill in all your information. You go through this long process. Well, why just not select your size? Medium, buy. automatically get shipped to your address. How can you do that? Well, you've got the payment information tokenized on the device. It's already there. All your shipping information's in the cloud because it's connected. You've shipped to that address a few times before. You just created a new channel that you can actually use to sell products. You don't actually have to redirect. You can do that through email. You can do that through an application. Pinterest in the US has started testing this and actually using this with companies like Neiman Marcus. So Neiman Marcus puts on, here's a great bag on Pinterest. You don't actually have to get redirected. You simply click on buy it in Pinterest. You just bought a bag. So what this is actually doing is opening up new opportunities, opening up completely new channels. So you no longer have to, like I mentioned, go to the store. That store is now everywhere. And that's being, it's already actually happening with the likes of, like I mentioned, like Facebook, with Uber, with tickets, directly, being able to buy tickets for events through the Messenger app, with Pinterest, and it's rolling out to more and more channels. So to summarize, payments, e-commerce, it actually is all about crossing borders. And like I mentioned, 3 borders to cross. The demographic one to make sure that, not even make sure, more and more people are going to have access to payments, to e-commerce, to financial services. That means this pie is definitely going to be growing and growing quite quickly. Second thing is geographic borders. They're open. So it's a matter of whether or not we as companies are willing to actually take that step and start thinking about actually how to reach all the consumers Europe-wide or worldwide. Right? And the third one is not to think about e-commerce as, hey, I need to have a web shop. You don't. You can have a way of accepting payments for providing goods or services without actually having a web shop. You can actually sell through different channels without actually creating one. So there's a lot of borders that are being crossed and lots more to come. Thank you for your time.